greetings, everyone out there in internet land. My name is Troy Bernier, and we have an interesting topic for you today. We're going to be talking about AI, and we're going to talk a lot about that brand AI. But to be more specific, we're going to be talking about workers' rights, privacy, and, as you know, a little bit about the SAG writer strike. How artificial intelligence, which a lot of people are now trying to call it machine learning. And I don't want to say trying to call it that, because that's what it always was called, machine learning. So we're going to go into a great depth of detail and talk a lot about how this works, how it affects us, and what is there to come. So with us today, we have some awesome group of folks joining us. We have Isabella Douzoglou Muñoz. I hope I didn't smash that up. She's a Ph.D. student using computational and experimental biophysics to understand the biomechanics of Alzheimer's disease. She recently completed a study in image segmentation with deep learning and interstellar spectroscopy of large organic molecules at the European Space Agency Research and Technology Center. We also have Matthew Ph.D., who is a professor of law at the University of Minnesota Law School, where he specializes in labor and employment law, corporate law, and data privacy. He is the primary author of the Privacy and Autonomy chapter of the Restatement of Employment Law, as well as a co-author of the book, Constructing the Corporation, From Shareholder Primacy to Shared Governance. Prior to teaching, he served as a field attorney for the National Labor Relations Board in New York City. We also have with us Mr. Todd Cherniawsky, who is a production designer and art director for some of the most well-known TV programs and movies ever. If you ever heard of Obi-Wan Kenobi on the famous Disney Plus channel, Star Trek Picard on the Paramount Plus channel, that old horror film called Pet Sematary, as well as the upcoming Disney Star Wars Ahsoka and the big family favorite Lilo and Stitch. And he was also a two-time winner at the Miami International Science Film Festival's Europa Award, which is an award that is only given to people who've demonstrated that they can create entire worlds just with their imagination. So imagine the amount of intellectual property that is created in an environment like that. This is the reason why today I've invited these very different people from very different industries and very different locations of the earth to share with us their opinions on how artificial intelligence is going to intrude in our lives, become part of our lives, help us live our lives. I don't know. We'll see what's yet to come. So to start out, we know that this artificial intelligence or machine learning is something that this is not really that new. It's been around for a bit. We do have some variances that have come to our desktops and our browsers, and we're able to use these things for free and learning very quickly at the potential that they have. And it's radicalizing everything that we do in our day-to-day. So let's start out by prefacing that this AI brand that we call AI, it may not be the best, most suitable brand for it. Machine learning. And why is that? So I asked our audience here with us here, why machine learning? Why are we calling it machine learning? Isabella, can you tell us a little bit about how this AI works?
So I guess the origin for machine learning kind of goes into the core structure of the beginning, or the first algorithms that were developed to learn information, so from large quantities. So essentially what machine learning is aiming to do is to understand large structured data and make a decision or make an inference. And when you present an algorithm lots of information, there are certain calculations you can make. So for instance, when you're doing deep learning specifically and you have a picture, there's a matrix, and each matrix has a pixel value. And then you perform a convolution or a multiplication to reduce the matrix space into lower dimensions. to have, let's say, one value, and with that value you can make an inference of what that picture has. So machine learning, again, is like a statistical inference. After you've seen large amounts of data that follow a specific distribution, whether it might be Gaussian or skewed or any kind of distribution, as long as you see it many, many times, then you can make an inference. So again, the best term to use is machine learning, because it's artificial intelligence is more of an umbrella term to try to identify, or that we humans use to identify this technology, or it was at least developed very, very early on, the idea of what artificial intelligence might be. Indeed, machine learning is what we should be using.
Right. So these are it's all based on what we give it, the information that we give it. So like a lot of folks like to use web scraping, where you're going out on the internet and you're basically just copying information on websites, regardless where the websites are, but you could be targeting on a specific subject, and then you're categorizing it, or should I really say classifying that information. This is something that people like to use, feature engineering and classification. These are mathematical, statistical schemes to help us sort the information and value it and rank it and so forth. And it can be done in so many different ways. We like to look at the world in 3 dimensions, but when it comes to machine learning and what a computer can do, it looks at these things not in 3, not 4, but in dozens of dimensions, way beyond anything that our brains are trained to perceive. So there's a lot that can be done on a very short period of time. So what happens, Isabella, if the model or this algorithm that's used is not the same as another one? What comes out?
So that's a difficulty in training large models, or at least training models at all. So the transferability, I think it's called transfer learning. In some cases, it's very well established for image, classification and so on. But let's say for SVN or support vector machine and basic machine learning algorithm, it's not so much, and others. So actually, that's the biggest issue with the development of neural network architectures, is that they don't always know how to switch tasks. They're very well trained on one task. But let's say ChatGPT was then asked to calculate the physics function. It might learn from the text in papers, but does it actually make the calculation properly? No, there are adaptations of that. But anyways, my point is that is one of the biggest issues in developing AI models, that they're very good at one thing, or the thing that they are trained to do.
Interesting. So I then have to ask Todd, being a creator of such an incredible library of content, where's the line drawn to where you require a machine to help you do your work? Explain to us what that process is like.
Sure. But just quickly as a preface, I just want to state that, the opinions I'm expressing are mine and solely mine. I am not speaking for the Art Directors Guild, and by no means am I speaking for SAG or the WGA or any other creative agency or any of my colleagues. But my opinions have been kind of formed through both, personal intuition, but then also feeling the emotional implications of my colleagues. And to me, I think that's one of the big also aspects of this conversation of machine learning versus AI. I personally am, in general, supportive of these new tools. So Midjourney and Stable Diffusion are 2 of many image generators that, through verbal prompting, creates the imagery that we've seen. Some recent kind of viral examples are, what if Wes Anderson made a Star Wars movie? What if I believe it was a take on Dune as well, through, I don't think it was Van Gogh, but it was another classical artist, might have been Monet. But it's that ability to mash up and basically explore visual ideas. I have been using those two applications, and again, those are two of many, for just over a year now. I think it was around May of last year I started getting wind of it and played around with it quite a bit. I think there's 2 points I want to make as a generalization. First off is I see it very, very valuable for exploration and what I would call reference creation. When a production designer or directors of photography, those two positions are essentially the visual authors of a motion picture or a television show. So along with the director and the producers, we are trying to build that world, create the photographic language, the lens language, etc., to tell the story as best as possible. The one thing that a production designer and a director of photography have that none of these tools have is emotional response and life experience. So I think it's, I have used it twice in order to create a pitch package, which is a very standard process. A script will come to me. I will then scan through my art books, my design books, find imagery that's helpful, do web searches, etc. What these machine language tools allow me to do is create reference that is unique, and it's not an identical image that one of my other production designer colleagues who has read the same script and we are competing for the same job. Chances are within those pitch package, 50% of the imagery is identical from designer to designer, because we're just searching Google, we're searching on Bing, whatever our search method is, the same imagery starts to come up. What Midjourney and Stable Diffusion allow me to do is come at it with a slightly different angle and create unique reference imagery that I can then take into Photoshop or After Effects and play with and manipulate further. So that's the first thing. I think these are great and wonderful tools. My criticism of these tools is when an image comes back to me, why don't I get a bibliography, a meta tag list of what was mined, what was collaged, and what was pulled from? Because as I'm creating images, I'm seeing like, damn, that's from a Ryan Church illustration. That's from a Dylan Cole illustration. I think that's James Klein. Like, it's just, I start to look over and over and over again, and I'm seeing my colleagues, people who I work with, their work being copied, manipulated, ripped off, uncredited. So that's my, that's what I'm trying to balance as a creative person myself, is this amazing opportunity. And then on the flip side, it's completely throwing things up in the air as far as giving credit where credit is due, until something becomes part of the cultural fabric, like a Van Gogh painting, like a Monet painting. You know those distinctly immediately. Picasso, Francis Bacon. You can go through the whole history of art. That individuality and emotional context cannot be replicated by any of this software. When an image is generated, and let's say it's pretty close, it's not bad, but in essence, I need 25% more sadness, 5% more depression. I can't tell any of this software to do that. I still have to then go into Photoshop, do paint overs, manipulate it further. There is no emotional context, and there is no proper thought process of, hey, if we just nudge this here, because these image generation software pieces, software apps use a seed. The seed, even if you force the same seed, it doesn't give you the same response. And I think that's wonderful. I love that idea that it's spaghetti on the wall. But as I've said to my colleagues, and I have several that are anti, like, we should not be using this. We cannot embrace it. My answer to them is, hey, guys and gals, what have we been doing for the last 30 years? Designing science fiction movies that depict this. It's our fault. You know, we're the ones that have been perpetuating this as pop culture artists and designers and storytellers. We have made it acceptable so that people actually aren't completely confused. They may not know how the sausage is made, but there's an awareness already because of storytelling. And it's not just us. You go back to Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Philip K. Dick, and endless authors have all kind of, you know, laid out the groundwork for these technologies. So yeah, the big thing for me is, why can't creditate? Why has it become the Wild West so quick?
Wow. Of course, I would ask you that, man, because there are a lot of folks that I know who, yeah, they're very upset. They want this to be, they want the plug pulled. Some folks feel that their rights are, you know, that they basically feel like they're not going to have a job, that their future is done. They're going to have to go do something else. But yes, I do understand that it is a tool that could be used in a way that actually works in some circumstances. But it appears that, and of course, we're going to accelerate at the end of this, the description of the talk. We're going to get to that real quick. But before we do that, I'd like Matt to give us a take on what's happening through the lens of legalese.
Right. Well, I think what Todd was talking about was credit, right? And I think that's really a critical aspect to any creative endeavor. Any creator builds on what other creators have built in the past, right? And yet they add something new, right? And the best creators bring something new to the table that makes people look at things a different way and understand things a different way and have a different emotional reaction. And so I 100% agree with Todd that the balance is kind of using tools to help people create better, right? We want to make people more efficient, right? Part of this debate is, you know, kind of a concern about looking like Luddites. It was really interesting. I was reading over some of what the internal Writers Guild debates were about whether they should say, we're going to say this should not be used at all, versus it can be a tool that can be used by writers, you know, as part of their process. And the pushback they got from that was, well, so you're saying you all should be able to use it and get the credit for it, and studios shouldn't be able to use it at all. That seems like you want to have your cake and eat it too, right? But of course, then the other thing, I think the kind of the other side of the spectrum would be, and what writers are really worried about, and people in all sorts of creative endeavors. I mean, people are worried about it in academic settings, right? There's a huge worry now that students will just, you know, upload the exam question and get an answer, and it won't be the best answer, but it'll be a passing answer in a lot of cases. In fact, some of my colleagues at the University of Minnesota had answers created for them, and the students all passed, right? They got between, I think, a C- and a B, depending on the class. But so it's really a lot of different fields where this is coming up, and people don't want to be replaced. And people are also worried that, you know, that soul, that kind of individual human spirit, will be drained out of the process, particularly by studio executives who are looking to cut costs and say, oh, you know, we'll just hand this over to the AI, you know, to ChatGPT or to different artistic programs, and that they'll do it, and we can just cut, you know, writers out of the process. We can cut artists out of the process. And then when it comes to name, image, and likeness, we can cut actors out of the process by using their faces, because that's something that still is meaningful to audiences, right? You want to see the actors and actresses that well, the characters that they've played, you want to see them. But if we can create versions of them and use them, then we won't even need the actors anymore. But of course, all this is derivative, right? All this is derivative of people having done work in the first place, either actors having acted and created a character that people really like, or artists having created landscapes and visions of wild, imaginative scenarios that people could never have thought of. So that's, I think, when it comes to the law, right? The law is trying to balance this all out. You have copyright, you have name, image, and likeness. You have trade secrets, which are often the heart of the algorithm. So a lot of different things. We can talk about those in different aspects, but the law is really trying to figure out who has a right to kind of prevent other people from using it, or at least at the very least, get licensing fees and revenues on an ongoing basis, and versus who has the right to just use it as part of their creative process and not worry about either credit or payments.
So no, those are really good points, Matthew. And I'd like to go back to what you mentioned, Todd, about the meta tags, right? The meta tags that were used in the creation of this image, because this is kind of like, from that vantage point, it's almost like the way things were when music streaming first came out. So a lot of this music that, you in the past, it would only be on radio or DVD, you could hear this music. And now being streamed, the issue became, well, whose music are you playing? What's going on with the royalties? This was the argument with Napster back in those days. And essentially what's happened is that now we have software that's able to distinguish the song so that royalty payments can be associated accordingly. And the only argument that you're hearing from that now is that the song has to play several billion times to get what they would get with a million times now. So it's like 1,000 times less money is being diminished. But the mere fact that if there is a meta tag or a string or an array of assets that are used, now all of a sudden there's a way to monetize the system. And I'm almost certain that this is, I could even just say it, understanding how some of these systems work, that there should be the ability for that to take place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not much of a programmer, but I use Python intermittently because it's one of the strongest programming languages between graphic software. But I'm just, I can't imagine how that is even tough. And I'd love to hear from Isabella how that could get implemented into, I think, just how we proceed. I mean, I know that, the musicians unions, SOCAN, they figured out sampling really quick.
Yep.
Really, really quick. And quick, I mean, it still took a few years and the dust needed to settle, but nobody dares take a chance. The moment that a politician uses somebody's song that artist did not give permission, there's a cease and desist within minutes. So the music industry figured it out very aggressively and quickly.
Yes.
I'm, given that we're maybe a year and a half into what I would call an accelerated awareness and a movement, I feel like we're just at this tipping point and at this place where we can still lasso this beast and get it under control. So I'd love to hear what Isabella and Matt have to say about the ability to course correct.
So in principle, it's very possible to have an output that would tell you what are what were the inputs that they're statistically relevant to your prompt, let's say. So let's say if you say astronaut on a horse, let's say, then how many of the astronaut pictures were they credited to NASA? And you would then get a distribution of which images score the highest and what their credit, and let's say the horse and so on. I think you understand what I mean. It's just that they haven't implemented this. for some reason. And also it's not clear to me if the training data is owned by them. That's also something that is, I think, a big issue. It's like who owns what, the data or the model? And especially in my field, the medical science and the applications that we use machine learning to segment, let's say, X-ray images, that data cannot leave the hospital. But then that model is essential. And then there's the histologists or the people running the X-ray machines that are afraid to lose their job because of this and so on. So I think that the regulation and the crediting and the referencing is a little bit of a complicated subject, and you can actually see it reflecting on the AI Act of the Parliament. They try to sort of classify what is high risk, low risk, and mid risk, but it's a very vague start, and there's so much conflict of interest and so on. So I think with the music industry, it feels like it's music, it's just music, and maybe that made it easier. But nowadays there's so much conflict of interest, and also for many years we've been giving data to companies and they have been selling it, and we're actually always in constant contact with machine learning algorithms recommending us things, and we had no idea until quite recently. And then we became aware. So yes, it's of course very important to see progress in this regard, and that's also the reason why it's going so slowly, in my opinion.
And you, Matt?
Yeah, no, I think that's what Isabella says is exactly right. If you can figure out the data and figure out what percentage, that actually sounds terrific, right? That we could say, okay, it's this, this goes to NASA photographs, right? But one thing I don't know is to what extent, right? What is the pool of data? If you just have bots running loose on the web, right? If I put a picture up on my website that I think is cool and no one really cares about it, but it might be under my name, but it might be someone else's photo that I just kind of cut and pasted. It's so easy to take an image and use it, and so maybe you'll have greater enforcement of like low level copyright violations because of concerns that they're feeding into bigger databases. People will be more concerned to kind of make sure. Obviously this is something came up with YouTube, right? YouTube actually worked with creators to make sure that they were not, the Wild West of copyright violation.
That's right.
But it's still hard to keep track of everything, and obviously, the technology is there to enable people to, download a movie on a pirated website. That has shifted, I think, from the late 90s. It's become less socially acceptable on some level.
But what definitely is happening is that the content, a large chunk of content, is being monetized, so people are profiting off of creating the original content, and that is so. There are mechanisms at play that can help this process, become more legitimized and more fair. It looks like it's capable of happening.
Right. No, I think it is. And it's something that's happened in a lot of these industries at different times. The Writers Guild really fought to get that credit process in place in the 1930s. There's a great book by Catherine Fisk about that process. And it'd be interesting to see if AI is a possible if the Writers Guild itself would want to use AI to determine, what percent of a script should be attributed to one author versus another, right? Because now I think it's done by individuals who kind of use their own individual judgment. But there are ways you could, make that more of a quantitative process rather than a qualitative process.
Right.
But so that's just another. So in some way, yeah, you could use these tools to help, assign credit. But there are forces in tech that don't want that to happen, right? Because that makes these things less efficient. It makes things more expensive to use their tools. And you see that in the Google fights, the early Google fights about access to books, right? Google pitched itself as, hey, we want access to all these books, and we want to scrape them, and that was reined in over time. But Google pitched it as, oh, you're against learning. It's much better for this information to get out there and be used by all of humanity. But right, the counter argument is that hurts the creators. And where does that money funnel to? It funnels to these huge tech companies, right? So I mean, now their big tech companies are in the creative space, right? With Apple Studios and Amazon getting more involved, and so I think you're seeing that a little bit now too. This kind of clash of different mindsets. A Hollywood mindset that is very interested and has been developed as a way of facilitating creative work that is credited, that is remunerative in a way that can enable you to have a lifestyle, that you can have a career in the area. And that's what you see, the fear on the actors and the writers, that the next step might be to turn everyone into a type of Uber driver who's an independent contractor who's paid and then loses any rights after that. And it's a much more contingent lifestyle at that point.
Whoa. Well, that wouldn't be the most exciting thing to develop if it goes that route. But with the current state of affairs, it may go a little longer like this before change takes place. What do you think, Todd?
Sorry, I was muted. I think we're in for a bit of a long haul. Again, just my opinion. I am hopeful that towards the end of the year, both sides need to get to the point where we get back to things. I think it's a twofold thing. At some point, all of us will need to work again. So there might be a little bit of movement from those of us that just ultimately we need to get back to things. We need to be able to provide for ourselves, our families, our loved ones. But there is going to come a point where the streamers run out of new content. And when that happens, subscriptions will dive. And I think that will be the power of a lengthier strike, is that people will, I mean, we saw it, in the third quarter, the second quarter of last year, when as the plague started to kind of end and people were going back outside to the park, seeing live music, going to the theater, going back to restaurants, the necessity of being, content consumers of, 3 to 10 hours of Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc., all day long, because we were not allowed to interact for that first big chunk of time. Right. I think the necessity of what that became to our lives, binge watching, consuming stuff, that has started to dissipate a little bit. I mean, people still enjoy great shows. That is never going to change. But I think the honeymoon period of the streamers being able to spend like drunken sailors and just make anything and everything, out of this might come the benefit of a reassessment of quality over quantity.
Yeah.
I mean, most studios can make X amount of motion pictures a year. And it's tough enough to, it's tough just making a bad movie, let alone a great movie. The economics of it, the energy that's required, it's just a massive endeavor. So I'm hoping that there are, I have to stay positive and hope that there are some positive benefits to all this, that the dust is going to settle. I mean, we have so many streaming options, so many menu options. Yeah. So I think it's going to get into a level where we can start, being more picky and selective of what we do and what we watch. And as over our next period of time, where things, all the new content, which those of in the industry made at the end of last year, during the first 2 quarters of this year, all that stuff is in post-production. So post-production is not affected as severely. There are minor discrepancies. Obviously, you can't bring cast members back to do looping.
Right.
Not all of the SAG contracts are affected. There's big conversations right now about permits being allowed for our independent feature film and documentary feature film. So there are things that there's a little bit of gray area, and I know several SAG members have blatantly labeled that regardless if you're just working, you're scabbing. Others have gone as far as saying, like, no, we are striking for this contract, and we have to, we can't start blurring the lines, and we have to, stick to our Constitution, our laws,
sure,
and labor laws. And it's like, so there, again, I think it's getting better. People's use of language and people's understanding is getting better. But it's a very emotional thing, because for some people, this is the apex in their careers where they may not have one anymore. Yes. And I think that's why it's a very impassioned strike. Things are on the table that are very important fiscally, medical benefits, etc. But then there's this just great unknown of, well, on that show, I was cyber scanned and there was a digi-double made of me. Where's that data? And, oh yeah, that 10-page contract that, my agent or I signed, where in the language does it say, like, oh my God, there's that word perpetuity in the entire universe? Those, I'm not citing any examples. I'm just giving, the blanket fear that people have, because there is, privacy is very, very important. To Isabella's point, people's medical records, that's as personal as you can get, both physical and mental. And I think then now we're just into this realm right now where there's not enough definition and clarity. And so, for people like myself, dare I say, we're hoping and relying on scientists like Isabella and lawyers like Matt to help, who already have, humility and humanity and are part of watchdogs and at the front line of this stuff. We need those people. We need scientists. We need legal professionals to help protect us and navigate us through this very complex land.
So you touched on a couple points. One about time, and I want to add to that. And here's a question to Isabella: how much time is it going to take for these algorithms to become so good that you won't need people?
Well, that's a question that can only be answered depending on what kind of algorithm. So, for instance, image segmentation or anything to do with images, I think we're pretty close to no need for human intervention. But for instance, also this ChatGPT is a great example of how well they have trained the model such that they don't need any human intervention, and it's fairly interpretable to large masses, which is also something we've never seen before. So we speak of these large models, like also the protein folding, AlphaFold and AlphaGo, and all these Google innovations. These are only a few of them, and we're only starting to see them now. And so I cannot predict how long it will take till we see more, but I'm sure that we will see much more. And also something to consider that these models are very, no one in their basement can make such a large model. So there's only the very, very wealthy companies or very highly skilled teams that can do this.
Well, let me interject and ask that question then. How large is the data set that they're using to do these?
So the data set, I think they said 500 billion tokens. So like numerical values linked to a word. I don't know how large was their data set, because tokens meaning each word. How much, not clear, I have to look further. But it's more so the parameters, like 75 billion parameters or calculations that need to be made, and 96 layers. So that's a very deep neural network. And also the architecture was based on like a new design from a paper called Attention is All You Need. So it's a sort of new concept in deep learning architecture design. So again, I think it really depends on the innovation of scientists working in developing new architectures that then they would sort of propagate the use of large models of any kind. But yes, I think the biggest examples that we have now, language models and image models, are very, very good. But in my field, or at least in the sciences, that we're using small data, this does require human intervention, and also we are open source, so heavily open source, and it gets very expensive when you want to buy services from these large companies. So that's another topic. But nevertheless, I think within the next, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see many, many more large players and more changes coming, at least into our lives.
Yeah. But to try to give the audience and some of us a good understanding of the size, okay, because we all know what gigabytes are, we know what terabytes are. Most people are not familiar with a petabyte, which a petabyte is 1,000 terabytes, right? So are we talking about petabyte scale or beyond that?
So it depends on what the architecture or where the model was trained. If it was, what was the computer architecture of the model? So I think that the training was done in a very, very large computer and an endless amount of data that they trained on. But something that you need to understand, that the model is not heavy. So the model is sort of like a mathematical function that if you give it an input or a set of tokens, then it can make a calculation just by going through this massive network that already has all these activation functions saved. And this is a rather small, it doesn't require a lot of data. So this is what that is on the cloud or wherever, and you're actually inputting your inputs going into that, not into the, you don't have access to the large data. So that's, yeah, maybe a bit more technical on machine learning, but yes, so the large computation is done elsewhere, and the large data is stored somewhere else also.
Interesting. I know that the guy Sam Altman from ChatGPT said the cost of training the GPT-4 was more than 100 million.
Yes.
You know,
energy costs, time. Yeah. Also, the people who are doing the fine tuning.
Of course.
That's actually the most costly. The validating or the labeling of the data for any large model.
What is the validation done by hand, manually by a person, or is it something that can be automated?
So actually, why ChatGPT is so interpretable and also was able to be accessible to society, in my opinion, is because they combined two different architectures. So like large language model, which deals with words, and also reinforcement learning. So they optimize for certain prompts. So what are the most common things that people might ask? And they kind of gave a numerical value to sort of tell the algorithm that, oh, this is maybe what you will expect, and maybe you should not respond this, or you should respond that. Or so they give feedback on what does it respond. And with that input, then it can learn how to interact with humans a bit better. So that is actually the key, in my opinion, to why ChatGPT is so famous. And so not only is it accessible, but it actually works quite well by combining those two trains of thoughts or those two designs of architectures.
Yeah, I've used it quite a bit, and it does. I have not, maybe once or twice of say 100 times I've used it where I've seen it have anything questionable. it's pretty good at what I'm using it for. Wow. Okay. So, Matt, let me ask you this. Let's start to wrap this up here because we're at past our 45-minute mark. And what's next? How do you see this concluding? What does the conclusion look like a couple years down the line, or is it going to take that long before something is done?
Well, I think it'll be incremental, right? I think it'll be a long road, like Todd was saying, and there will be steps along the way, branches that go in one direction or another. And I think you could see a very, Fran Drescher used the word dystopian. I don't know if I'd go that far, but you could see a world where, the one thing that I think everyone acknowledges is that these machine learning programs, these algorithms, are very good at building on what has been done, but they learn from us, right? They have to learn from what we've done because that's what they're reflecting back to us, right? As Isabella was saying, they're engaging with us, right? And so in some ways, I think the creative fields are the most protected because they depend most on human insight, human creativity. It's the hardest to just say, okay, do what's been done before. I mean, obviously, it's kind of a common complaint sometimes that, that work is derivative or, but, I talk sometimes about Harry Potter because in some ways, Harry Potter is one of the most derivative franchises ever, right? Everything that happens there is, part of folklore going back, to the Middle Ages. But it was done in a different way and it was incredibly engaging to people at a particular moment in time. So that, I think, will be really hard to take out of the process because people won't like it, right? If you just say, hey, chat GPT, come up with an image or come up with a script or, one of these programs come up with an image, I want to get my next alien, look at the xenomorph and a bunch of other aliens and design me an alien, right? If studios think they can do that, and one question will be, what are the legal rights, right? Will there be, if it's so obviously like the xenomorph but slightly different, right? Would that be a copyright violation? But beyond that, the question will be, will we still give the legal rights, the intellectual property rights, and to what extent will they be waivable, right? How will they be waivable? That's the one thing with the SAG contract is, will we allow individual actors to waive rights to use of their name, image, and likeness? Because then you'll see less well-known actors being pressured early on in their careers to give these things, again, the dystopian aspect of this would be in perpetuity, right? You can use me, you can create a hologram of me and use it however you want for the rest of time, right? That would be kind of terrifying, I think. But I think most people realize that would be problematic and there's going to be fights over how to manage this. But I'm hopeful, particularly when it comes to these programming, movies, television, all sorts of, the things that we engage with every day that we love so much. I do agree with Todd. It might be time to kind of rein it in a little bit with the content, but just as a user, this is just simply a personal plea. I have such a stack of things to catch up on. But no, because I think the core, I worry more, frankly, about lawyers because some of what lawyers do is more rote, right? But I think this industry, hopefully, if people push for their rights, I think hopefully, knock on wood, that things will proceed in a good way.
Right. Okay. And Isabella, how do you see this wrapping up in a couple of years?
To be honest, after looking into the AI Act of the EU, I'm quite relieved because they're putting a lot of emphasis on the ethics of AI, using AI, also in discrimination, and also in the high risk AI is very heavily regulated, which is very good. For the creative field, it's considered low risk, and you are just responsible for citing or saying that you have used AI for your generating your content, which I think is fair. But and also in the field of science, this is also tricky because there's a lot of people saying they have some data, but they don't. So this is another topic. But nevertheless, I think it's good. It's going in the right direction. People are talking, and I'm pretty sure that we're going in the right direction overall as a society.
Okay. And Todd, I'll give you the final take on this.
Well, I loved, Matt, how you brought this back into sci-fi by citing Alien. And I think that's a perfect example that speaks to, I think, how we can calm our fears about any of these machine learning or AI technologies replacing the artist, the storyteller, the designer, the creative person. Because Alien itself is derivative, beyond derivative, beyond derivative. It's quoting not only Dan O'Bannon's and Ron Shuslett's original material, but they're diving back into like 6- and 8-page comic books from the 40s and 50s, some Roger Corman movies. They've taken some of the best little moments and then amplified it. And then you get this collision of just great thinking, like Giger, and then Ridley Scott, and then the production design team that just created something that is to this day my bar. The Nostromo from Alien is just the best spaceship ever designed. And that took just this great collaboration of 100 artists and storytellers and filmmakers and technicians and craftspeople to achieve. And that layering and bringing things is still what none of these image generators have. Going back to, the pitch deck I made, that I shared that with the art department, but I can, beyond 100%, none of the imagery that was generated by that made it into the final movie, because none of it was quite right. What it allowed me to do was just explore a few different ideas and paths that I personally never thought. But ultimately, the visual language that we went with and the world building we did cited back to what Chris Sanders, the original animator and co-writer and co-creator of Lilo and Stitch, did back in 2002. We went back to the personal artist expression. And my illustrators, my set designers, we would look at the imagery and we might point to, like, see this little shape here, that's working. The other 95% isn't. Wow. So I think this is where the value is. It's it's different than going through art history books, photography books, that type of thing, where there's a non-linear approach of turning pages and processing imagery. I think, so I should say, it's a very linear path. Whereas when you do a Google search, you get 100 images and you quickly react without kind of processing. And I think it's very easy to discard an image that otherwise, if you just sit with a book for a half an hour and go through page by page, some of the things that may not stand out immediately come back. And that human creative process, I don't want to say it never happens, because I've been part of movies that have depicted that in several centuries, whether it's in Star Trek, Avatar. There's a whole variety of movies where we have put one foot into that swimming pool where that does start to happen. And I think this is it's a very, very exciting time for science fiction, because the future is now, and we're in this place where stuff is happening. And personally, I think, Isabella, what you're doing with Alzheimer's and mental health and brain chemistry and brain science, to me, that's where these technologies shine. we make some fun, interesting, thoughtful movies for people to get out of their own headspace and just enjoy life. But this is where I think it's fantastic, because that's, to me, that's where the real science fiction is being able to solve human condition problems with these technologies.
Yeah.
I can tell you it's an endless field. There's so much going on, and there's always something to learn. And so, yeah, if you're interested in actually making movies about that, that would be cool.
Awesome. Well, listen, I want to thank each of you, Isabella, Todd, Matthew. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your day, understanding this machine learning stuff. I really do, because we see how it's being adopted in our society here, and a lot of people are scared, and there's a big unknown, but it seems like we'll find our way. We'll find our way through it. It's just going to it'll take a little time, because as usual, people like to do wild things when new things come. So it's all part of the process. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We are done. And this is on YouTube, so it's going to repeat as many times you want to watch. All righty. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Very nice to meet you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.